I'm Alexa Schwerha with Campus Reform. A conservative student at the University of Texas at Austin lost his seat on student government after appearing on Fox News to discuss a campus controversy. Sterling Mosley is a senior at the university and a Campus Reform correspondent. He joins me now to break down the controversy and talk about how he eventually won back his position on student government to serve his campus. Sterling, thank you so much for joining me today.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, to start us off here, can you walk us through exactly what happened on your campus?
Of course. I appeared on Fox News for Campus Reform on the controversy around the Eyes of Texas here on campus. It's sort of been a controversy here for a few years now. A lot of students say that the song is has a racist history, that it was performed in blackface at some point, but the university itself went through, conducted a extensive investigation with historians, professors, school athletes, students, Texas X's alumni, and various other individuals who are important to the UT community. And ultimately, they concluded that the song itself wasn't racist, and that its history, while important, ultimately the song has evolved past it, has become something far more meaningful to a lot more Longhorns. And so that was sort of the initial context. And the student government, I had been involved with the Senate of College Councils, which was a legislative organization here on campus, and student government, which is a sort of sister organization, normally elected by students here on campus. We're looking to fill a appointment for a university-wide representative position. And so, being that I was involved pretty rigorously, I applied to fill that appointment. I was selected by a committee of the Speaker of the Assembly and two others, the clerk and the parliamentarian. And it was ultimately concluded that I'd be the best fit for that position. But what you first have to go through is an appointment process. And so I appeared in front of the student government, in front of the assembly, which is made up of about 50 representatives elected by the student body. And they went after me repeatedly on my interview that I did on Fox News, claiming, all these sort of things, calling me racist, saying that I don't get an opinion because I'm a white man, despite the fact that I'm a Longhorn, just like any of those others who were questioning me. I would say that, if you're a student at the school, you should have an opinion on your school song. And I tried my best to defend my position, but I ultimately was refuted by a pretty close vote. There were a good amount of yeses in my favor, but ultimately they voted against me. And so I decided to do what I thought was best, and go and run for the position instead. And I successfully ran a campaign, got a lot of people behind me, and actually won that position. And now I'm serving as a university-wide representative, the same position I was supposed to fill via the appointment for this upcoming semester. And well, starting last March and into the 2022-2023 academic year, where I'll be able to give conservative students a voice, and really share my viewpoint, which I've already begun thus far. And so far, I've been really enjoying it, because oftentimes a lot of leftist students who hold positions of power within student government try to shut me down, try to silence me a little bit, but I try to bring the conservative perspective as much as I can.
Oh, Sterling, it sounds like you're going to have your work definitely cut out for you. So, you mean to tell me that they admit you're the best person for the job, but simply because you went on Fox News and you spoke out about conservative beliefs, the student body turned against you?
That's right. And it was really, when that happened during the appointment process, I was honestly more disappointed than anything, um, and more saddened that my fellow students were unwilling to hear different opinions, unwilling to actually consider that there's another side to this issue that's really contentious, an issue that has been, divided campus for a few years now. Whether it's alumni speaking out against on the issue, or students, speaking out against the song. there's been a rigorous conversation about the eyes of Texas, and it was disappointing that the students who are supposed to represent, the entire student body, were unwilling to consider a perspective that at least 20%, I'd say, hold this perspective, if not more. I don't have the full statistics, but there should be a rigorous conversation about this controversy because ultimately the eyes of Texas is a nearly century old song, or over a century old, uh, and it's been a tradition that has lasted for decades and decades, for Longhorns, like my mother, like my grandfather, like my uncle, like my brother, who all sang that song, and I sing it proudly as well. I played it in the band, um, and so I don't think that we should be quick to reaction when it comes to controversy, and quick to action when it comes to these types of issues, because it's important to not only students but to all the Texas Exes who came before us. I've actually done my best to uh, give conservatives a voice. Oftentimes, I am the only individual in dissent or voting no on resolutions brought up by representatives of the assembly. Because oftentimes these are leftist pet projects, to be honest, that you know don't really get much debate, don't get much conversation, because everyone is sort of you know voting in favor of these because they might be a friend of yours or you agree full throatedly with these ideas. um, and I'm really glad that I'm able to bring that perspective, because oftentimes these students hear nothing about conservative perspectives because they're around an environment where their professors are saying the same leftist talking points, where their fellow peers, where the media, they're all sort of frankly in an echo chamber, um, even in the state of Texas, where they one on another continue to get more radical, continue to spout ideas and bring forth resolutions that lead to funding and action that leads to things, uh, like, for example, um, advocating for like drag queen story hours, for instance. That's actually something that we've run into on campus here a few times, where drag queens are brought on campus. Now, got nothing against those individuals, but we're here to learn. We're not here to indulge these leftist fantasies. um, I ultimately want to, as in student government, give as much money, as much of the tuition dollars, because ultimately we're student government gets $124,000 of funds allocated to us, and we should be giving that money back to students. The tuition rates are already so high, and with inflation and all of that getting out of hand, putting more money in the pockets of students is what we really should be doing, instead of funding leftist pet projects that are really just undermining the social community on our campus, and really uh, purporting these ideas into the minds of freshman students who are just coming from across the entire state of Texas, who might be conservative. But when you are completely just overwhelmed by leftist talking points, there's a lot of pressure to go to that side of the aisle, and join along with the crowd, I'd say.
I'm glad that you brought up those so called pet projects because those are something that we cover here at the Leadership Institute's Campus Reform pretty extensively. And a lot of the times, these so called pet projects are funded by student government using student fees. So being fiscally responsible is an issue that's very important, specifically to conservative students. So my question is, are these so called liberal pet projects, these radical activities, are they encouraged by student governments?
100%. They are funded. I was actually just in a funding meeting this morning. We were talking about appropriations and special projects, and there are thousands, tens of thousands of dollars available for special projects that assembly members, representatives can apply for. Now, honestly, some of the projects are good. Like, for instance, one of the projects that a university-wide representative is working on is working funding like nightcaps for drinks so that you know they don't put drugs in drinks and there's complications with that sexual assault. But that is uh, not all cases. There's a lot of cases where students are funding their pet projects, and when you're in these financial meetings, there's not a whole lot to debate. There's not a considerable amount of debate, especially when it comes to leftist ideology, that projects that align with those that ruled perspective, because students don't want to step on any toes. I think that that's another perspective that I'm bringing. I think that a lot of students in the assembly, some are left wing, but a lot are moderate. And I would say that me and maybe one or two others are conservative. I've actually been able to get another conservative into the assembly via an appointment, which is great. I'm glad that we're growing in number. But leftists normally dominate the conversation, and moderates are unwilling to speak out, give a different perspective because they don't want to step on people's toes. They don't want to hurt feelings. But when in reality, that's important. And so I'm really glad that I'm able to go up in front of the assembly, give my perspective on a thing like a Plan B vending machine, for instance. Plan B has the ability to cause abortions, but we had a very lengthy debate about that, nearly 3 hours, because every single time I would continue to ask questions, I would continue to bring up a presentation, present it to the assembly, lay out the side effects of the drug and that type of thing, and why should we be funding this. And so it's that kind of lengthy debate that I've really enjoyed, frankly, but it allows for students who are not necessarily conservative, but who might have reservations about these leftist pet projects to actually speak out and do something as well, because they see that a conservative is standing up and is willing to speak out and is willing to step on toes. Um, so, and aside from that, there's a number of certain things that I want to do with student government, things like funding for parent students who are parents, make sure that those parents have the necessary resources for their children, while they're pursuing an education. That's something that I've been working on a lot so far. And it's things like that, a lot of quality of life things for students and for populations that aren't necessarily thought of, because ultimately as a conservative, we're very pro-family. I want to ensure that parents can get their education, but also ensure that their children are provided for and that they have the necessary resources. But it's things like that that I want to work on. And I'm glad that so far I've been able to make a difference.
Sterling, you're obviously very involved on your campus, particularly in the political scene. Why do you think that more students should be involved and more in tune to what's going on with their campus politics?
More students should be paying attention because ultimately local politics is the thing that matters. Getting involved in local politics, whether it is on your campus or even in your city, that is one of the most impactful things that you can do. Um, we are, over $124,000 budget organization. That is a lot of funding. That is dozens of students' tuition going into student government. That matters because in times where inflation is super high, tuition rates are rising, students having an idea of where their money is going, that is imperative, that is important, that is fundamental to understanding what these uh, funds are going to. Because as a student, I don't want my funds going to leftist pet projects, right? I want my funds to go into my education, to my academic enrichment, to professors that are going to teach me well without having a political perspective. I don't want my money to go to things that I don't believe in. And students who aren't involved in student government, who aren't involved in their campus politics, I think that they're doing a disservice to themselves, a disservice to the funds that they're giving to the university, and a disservice ultimately to the university campus at large, because more voices in the conversation is what's going to create change on campus, what's going to ensure that your perspective is heard. And frankly, without having enough students involved in student government or involved, in activism, for instance, you're just going to have a bunch of leftist students dominate the conversation like they currently are. Our current executive alliance are all self-avowed progressives. Our Speaker of the Assembly is a progressive. He's the vice president of the University Democrats. The entire assembly is dominated by members of the University Democrats, and I'm the only student who is actively in a conservative organization in student government. And so you're having these student governments, which have tens of thousands of dollars of funds, dominated by leftist students who fund all of their projects because they like to pat each other on the back and get all these accolades and rewards from administration for all the good, the good that they're doing. But yeah, I think that ultimately, if you don't get involved in local politics where you're going to have the biggest impact, then you're doing yourself a disservice.
The University of Texas at Austin is a very liberal campus. It's a school that we've reported on numerous times here at the Leadership Institute's Campus Reform. And a lot of times, you're our go to for covering what's going on campus, specifically for campus protests. You've covered so many protests on campus that you actually can't go anymore because the leftist students, they know your name and they know your face. So, can you tell us a little more about your own experience and what you go through on your day to day life at the University of Texas at Austin?
It's been very eventful, especially when I go to these protests. Getting called things like a racist or a neo-Nazi. Wow, just it's so saddening to see how these leftist students think. Honestly, these blanket statements that they're throwing at me. Ultimately, they use them over and over again. They don't mean anything anymore. Um, and every day when I'm speaking out in student government or going and covering a protest, I'm just glad that I'm letting people know what's happening, because whether you're a conservative student or a conservative parent and who's sending their student to a university, or if you are a Texas X, an alumnus, it's important that you know what's going on your campus, because that's ultimately pressure from the outside. That's one of the biggest ways that you can change the environment, especially pressuring administration to do certain things. That is one of the biggest ways that you can fight against the leftist culture on campus, but also ensuring that conservative students are supported. Things like campus reform and the Leadership Institute have really allowed me to uh, do wonderful reporting, create a student newspaper. Our student newspaper is the Texas Horn. We've done wonderful reporting with that. Um, and ultimately, having the resources, I was able to intern with the Leadership Institute last summer, where I participated in over 100 hours of training, political training, fundraising, all these different things that have allowed me to not only be solid, have a solid understanding of my views, solid understanding of my perspective, but being able to appropriately speak out and share those views with others, to try to convince others that this is the right perspective, that this is the way that we should be governing ourselves, this is the way that we should be spending our funds in student government, all of those different things. But that wouldn't have been possible without campus reform, without Leadership Institute, and all of the wonderful trainings that they do. Um, and when it comes to reporting on these events, as you said, they know my face by now. They know who I am. And while it might be more difficult to cover these events, I'm still uh, focused on covering these, because without that, no one's going to know what happened. No one's going to know what they are actually saying, because that's important. And understanding how college students think and understanding how college students react to certain things, calling me a neo-Nazi, calling me a racist, all these things. That's important because, as we've seen, the common myth that you enter the real world and all these ideas go out of your head, that's been debunked over and over again. The things that are going on these college campuses, they're going to impact the workplace tomorrow. They're going to impact our modern politics tomorrow, and they're going to impact the direction of our country in the future.
That's why it's so vital that we have campus reform correspondents out there exposing and reporting on what's happening on college campuses, especially going out and exposing that liberal bias. So, my final question for you, Sterling, why is it so important that adults, people who aren't on a college campus regularly, why should they pay attention to your story and really focus in and pay attention to what happens in campus politics through student governments?
Adults should care because student government, as I said, it is, at least in my university, it's dominated by university Democrats. It's dominated by people who are passionate about policymaking, who are passionate about politics, are passionate about activism, understandably. But these individuals, they're going to be the same people who are going to go out into the world tomorrow, or even are currently, working on places like Capitol Hill, working on places like the state legislature. They're going to be our policymakers of tomorrow. They're going to be our politicians of tomorrow. The way that we see how they conduct themselves in student government, that can very well be replicated in a place like a state legislator, in a place like Congress, in a place like a school board or a mayor's office. It's important to pinpoint how they are conducting themselves and understand that that is very much how their strategy is going to work in the future. It's going to be things like silencing conservatives. It's going to be things like using parliamentary procedure and all these different things to make sure that conservatives can't come speak. Um, and it ultimately comes down to uh, them utilizing student government funds for things that they believe in, that they're pushing on freshman students who are coming from across the entire state, from small towns to big cities, and coming to Austin and really getting shell shocked with all the uh, leftist talking points, whether that be things as like pronouns um, or special projects that they are allocating for. Um, it's that type of thing why I think adults should be really wary of what is going on in their campus, because you're sending your child to this school. You're sending your child to an environment where they're honestly probably going to get indoctrinated. I wasn't one to I would have liked to think that I was pretty open-minded when I came to campus in back in 2019 before the pandemic. Um, but I was roped into that leftist uh, uh, doctrine, very much so. I got involved in the University Democrats. I participated in activism. I did all these things back in 2019. But once the pandemic happened, once things were wiped out, once everyone went home, I came to my senses, frankly, and I became conservative because I saw that in this bubble, that is UT Austin, you are bombarded with leftist talking points. You're bombarded with the idea that if you don't believe in these different things, you are an outsider, you are racist, you are a neo-Nazi. When in reality, it's just conservatives standing up for what they believe in, standing up for constitutional principles, standing up for family, standing up for a strong community. Um, and I don't think a lot of students realize that, but I think most importantly, a lot of parents don't understand that that is the environment that you are sending your child to. Because that's an environment where leftists dominate the conversation. And if you're not part of that in group, you're seen as an outsider. You're seen as someone who's antithetical to the cause, and they'll go after you with all they've got.
I can't help but point out the irony there that you used to be on the inside. You used to be one of them. But as soon as you dared think differently, considered another point of view, you were kicked out by the same student government, the same students that you used to agree with. Well, Sterling, thank you so much for coming on today and breaking down that issue, and best of luck in student government.
Thank you for having me, Alexa.